Two men walk into the same room on the same night. The first one is prepared. He's rehearsed his introduction. He knows exactly what he wants to say and who he wants to say it to. He extends his hand. He makes eye contact. He delivers his pitch with precision. And nothing happens. Conversations end politely. People smile and turn away. He leaves that room with a pocket full of business cards and not a single real connection. He tells himself it was the wrong crowd, but somewhere deeper, in a place he doesn't want to look, he knows. Something about him pushed every opportunity away before it had a chance to land. The second man walks into that same room 20 minutes later. Less polished, less rehearsed. He doesn't have a strategy. But within minutes, people are leaning in. Someone introduces him to a person he didn't ask to meet. A conversation turns into a collaboration. An opportunity begins forming before the evening is over. Same room, same people, same night. Completely different result. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years studying what separated these two men. He interviewed over 500 of the most successful people who ever lived, Edison, Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and asked them all the same question. What separates the people who attract wealth from the people who repel it? And what he found had nothing to do with talent, preparation, or intelligence. It had to do with something invisible, something most people don't even know they're carrying. Hill called it a broadcast, a signal your brain is transmitting every moment of every day, whether you're aware of it or not. One man's signal said certainty, abundance, arrival. The other said need and doubt. Please give me a chance. And every person in that room felt the difference before a single word was spoken. If you have ever walked into a room and felt invisible, not rejected, but invisible, as if the frequency you were operating on simply could not be received by the people around you. Then, what Hill discovered about the human brain in Chapter 12 of Think and Grow Rich may be the most important thing you ever hear. Because your aura is not something you're born with, it's something you're broadcasting. And tonight I'm going to show you exactly how to retune it. Now, I want to talk directly to you for a moment because I think I know something about where you are right now. You are not lazy. You are not sitting on the couch hoping life will hand you something. You have been working, reading, building, trying. You've put in more effort than most of the people around you, and you know it. And yet, somehow, the results don't match. Opportunities go to people who seem less prepared than you. Conversations that should have led somewhere just dissolve. You've started to suspect that there's something about your presence, something you can't see, can't name, can't seem to fix, that's quietly sabotaging everything you're building. And here's what makes it worse. You've tried to address it. Maybe you've done affirmations, stood in front of a mirror telling yourself that you're confident, you're abundant, you're magnetic. And for about 45 seconds, it almost felt true. Then you checked your bank account or walked into a room full of people who seem to have something you don't, and the whole thing collapsed. You've tried visualization. You've tried journaling. You've tried positive thinking, and none of it stuck. Not because those things are wrong, but because no one ever told you why they weren't working. No one told you the real mechanism. It's not your fault. And I mean that without a trace of empty comfort. It is genuinely not your fault, because what Hill discovered about the invisible signal you carry, the thing that determines whether wealth moves towards you or away from you, was written in Chapter 12 of Think and Grow Rich. And 90% of the people who read that book skip right over it. They take the desire chapter. They underline the persistence quotes. And they walk straight past the one chapter that explains why some people can attract success without apparent effort, while others grind for years and get nowhere. That chapter is about the brain as a broadcasting and receiving station, and it changes everything. But before I show you what Hill wrote, I need you to understand why it carries the weight it does. This is not a theory someone dreamed up in a self-help seminar. In 1908, Andrew Carnegie, a man who arrived in America as a penniless Scottish immigrant and built a fortune that, adjusted for today, would dwarf most modern billionaires, sat down with a young journalist named Napoleon Hill and gave him an assignment. Carnegie believed there was a definite philosophy behind every self-made fortune in history. Not luck, not talent, a set of identifiable, teachable principles that every successful person followed, whether they knew it or not. And he challenged Hill to spend 20 years finding them. Carnegie told Hill something during that first meeting that set the entire project in motion. He said that anything in life worth having is worth working for. But then he added something most people leave out. He told Hill that the work he was talking about wasn't physical labor. It was mental labor, the work of training the mind to vibrate in harmony with what you desire. Carnegie understood the broadcast before Hill ever had a name for it. 20 years. Think about that. Not a weekend workshop, not a 90-day challenge. Carnegie told Hill to interview the most accomplished people in America. Edison, Ford, Rockefeller, Wrigley, Bell, Schwab. More than 500 in total. Study how they think, document what they do differently, and find the thread that connects all of them. Hill accepted, and what he produced, after 2 decades of research, was not a collection of motivational quotes. It was an operating system for the human mind. 13 principles, each building on the last, and tucked near the end in chapter 12, he placed the principle that he knew most readers would resist. The principle that explains what your aura actually is and why it determines everything. Hill wrote something that stopped me the first time I read it. He said, "The brain is both a broadcasting and receiving station for the vibration of thought. The subconscious mind is the sending station of the brain through which vibrations of thought are broadcast. The creative imagination is the receiving set through which the energies of thought are picked up from the ether." Now, when I first encountered that passage, I almost dismissed it. It was late. I was tired. I'd been reading Think and Grow Rich for what I told myself was strategic insight. I wanted the practical stuff, the goal-setting frameworks, the organized planning chapter. And here was Hill talking about broadcasting stations and etheric vibrations, and it sounded, honestly, like it belonged in a different book. So I moved on. I went back to refining my goals, sharpening my plans, polishing my pitch. And then something happened that cracked me open. I walked into an opportunity I had been preparing for, genuinely preparing, for weeks. And I was completely invisible, not rejected, that I could have handled. Invisible. I said the right things. I had the right material. And the people in that room looked through me as if I were transmitting on a frequency they simply could not receive. I left and I sat in my car and I felt that familiar weight. The one that whispers, something about you is wrong. Something about you repels the very thing you want. That night I went back to chapter 12. And for the first time I didn't read it as theory. I read it as a diagnosis. Because here is what Hill was actually saying underneath the language of his era. Your subconscious mind, the part of you running beneath your conscious awareness, the part you don't control with logic or willpower, is constantly sending a signal outward. That signal is not made of words. It is not made of intentions. It is made of emotion. Whatever emotional state dominates your inner life, faith or fear, certainty or doubt, abundance or scarcity, that is the frequency of your broadcast. That is your aura. I and every person you encounter is unconsciously receiving it. This is what people mean when they say someone walks into a room and you just feel something about them. It's not charm. It's not confidence as a performance. It's the vibration of their dominant emotional state hitting you before their words do. And Hill didn't present this poetically. He described it as a mechanism. Your subconscious is the transmitter. Your emotions are the power source, and your aura, that invisible thing you've been trying to understand, is simply the frequency that results from whatever emotion is running the deepest. Let me show you what this looked like in practice. Because Hill didn't just theorize about this. He documented it in the life of a man named Edwin C. Barnes. Barnes arrived at Thomas Edison's laboratory in Orange, New Jersey, with no money, no credentials, no appointment, and no prior connection to Edison. By every external measure, he looked like a tramp. He had ridden freight trains to get there. He had nothing to offer except something invisible. But here's what Hill recorded. And this is the part that matters. Edison later said that something about Barnes made him pause. Not his appearance, not his words. Something behind it. Something in his bearing, his eyes, the way he stood in that room. Edison had seen thousands of people walk through his door wanting something. He could feel the frequency of want, of need, of please give me a chance. Barnes didn't carry that signal. Barnes carried the signal of a man who had already decided. His aura, his broadcast, was so saturated with absolute certainty that he would become Edison's business partner that it communicated more powerfully than any resume or pitch ever could. Hill wrote that Barnes stood there and something in his mental attitude made Edison give him the opportunity he wanted. Not his plan, not his experience, his mental attitude, his broadcast, his aura. And here is the principle underneath the story. Barnes didn't attract that opportunity by working harder than everyone else in the room. He attracted it because his emotional frequency matched the opportunity. Like a tuning fork, there is a phenomenon in physics called sympathetic resonance. If you strike a tuning fork and hold it near a second fork of the same frequency, the second fork begins to vibrate on its own. No one touches it. No force is applied. It simply responds to the matching frequency. But if the two forks are tuned differently, nothing happens. The second fork sits in silence, completely unmoved, as if the first fork doesn't exist. You are a tuning fork. Right now, as you listen to this, you are vibrating at a specific frequency set by your dominant emotional state. And wealth, opportunity, the right people, the right doors, those are tuning forks too. They can only respond to a matching signal. It doesn't matter how close you stand to them. It doesn't matter how much you want them to resonate. If your frequency doesn't match, they will sit in silence as if you were never in the room. Barnes matched, and his entire life changed because of it. But here's what most people miss about this. Knowing that you're broadcasting is only half of it. The real question is, what determines the frequency? What's the power source? And when I finally understood Hill's answer to that question, I realized why every affirmation I'd ever tried had failed. The subconscious mind does not respond to words. It responds to emotion. Hill was explicit about this. He said that thoughts which are not mixed with emotion have no influence on the subconscious mind. Read that again in your own mind. Thoughts which are not mixed with emotion have no influence on the subconscious mind. This means that when you stand in front of a mirror and say, I am wealthy, I am confident, I attract abundance, and underneath those words, your stomach is tight with the knowledge that your bank account says otherwise, your subconscious doesn't hear the words. It hears the feeling, and the feeling is doubt. So that's what it broadcasts, doubt wearing a mask of confidence, and everyone you meet can sense the mask, even if they can't explain why. Hill wrote something in chapter 11 that makes this devastatingly clear. He said that the subconscious mind will not remain idle. If you fail to plant desires in your subconscious mind, it will feed upon the thoughts which reach it as the result of your neglect. What he's saying is simple, and it's brutal. Your subconscious is going to broadcast something. The only question is whether you chose the signal or whether your fears chose it for you. Most people have never made a deliberate deposit into their subconscious. They've let fear, doubt, and the opinions of others make every deposit for them, and then they wonder why their aura repels wealth. Think of it this way. You've been whispering to your tuning fork, saying the right words, repeating the right affirmations, but never actually striking it. A tuning fork that isn't struck produces no frequency. It doesn't matter what's engraved on the handle. The only thing that makes it vibrate is impact. And in Hill's framework, that impact is emotion. Raw, felt, embodied emotion. You haven't been broadcasting the wrong message. You haven't been broadcasting at all. Hill called faith the head chemist of the mind. He said it was the emotion that, when blended with thought, transforms it into something the subconscious accepts and transmits. Not faith as a vague hope. Faith as a felt state. The emotional experience of certainty before evidence arrives. That is the power source. That is what struck Barnes's tuning fork so clearly that Edison could feel it across the room. And this is exactly what Hill saw in Henry Ford. When Ford told his engineers to build a V8 engine block cast in a single piece, they told him it was impossible. They had the math. They had the precedent. It could not be done. Ford didn't argue with their data. He didn't present alternative research. He said 3 words, do it anyway. And those 3 words carried something that transcended logic. His engineers heard his certainty before they processed his instruction. Ford's emotional broadcast, his aura, was so locked into the frequency of unshakable expectation that it literally altered what the people around him believed was possible. They worked for over a year, and they solved it, not because of Ford's technical knowledge, and he had almost none, because his tuning fork was struck so cleanly and so powerfully that it set the forks around him vibrating at a frequency they had never reached on their own. Now, I want to stop here and ask you something. Think about the last time you were in a room where you wanted something. A job interview, a first date, a meeting with someone who could change your trajectory. Can you remember what you were feeling in the 30 seconds before you walked through the door? Not what you were thinking, what you were feeling. Because that feeling, or whatever it was your broadcast. That was your aura at the exact moment it mattered most. And if you're honest with yourself, you already know whether it was faith or fear. Hold that memory. Because what I'm about to show you next is how to make sure you never walk through a door on the wrong frequency again. The question becomes practical. How do you actually strike the fork? How do you move from understanding this principle to living inside it? Hill's answer was auto-suggestion, his third principle, but not the way most people practice it. Not as a verbal exercise, as an emotional rehearsal. The practice is not to repeat words. The practice is to generate the feeling of your definite purpose already fulfilled, to sit with that feeling until your breathing changes, your posture shifts, your chest opens. That is the moment your subconscious accepts the new instruction. That is the moment your broadcast frequency changes. When I stopped treating auto-suggestion as something I said and started treating it as something I felt. The shift in how people responded to me was not subtle. It was dramatic. Not because I was performing confidence, because I was no longer performing at all. The signal was clean, and people could feel it. I'll give you one example. About a year after I started this practice, I walked into a meeting I had no business being in. I was the least credentialed person at the table, and halfway through, the person leading the discussion stopped, looked at me, and asked what I thought. Not because I'd said anything brilliant, because something about my presence made them want to hear from me. That had never happened before, not once in my life. The only thing that had changed was my broadcast. But I know the objection forming in your mind right now. You're thinking, I can't hold that feeling all day. I feel certainty for 5 minutes during meditation, and then the world crashes back in. Bills, rejection, evidence that nothing has changed. How do you maintain a frequency when everything around you is broadcasting the opposite? Hill believed that what I'm about to share with you next is what separates the small percentage who achieve lasting wealth from the vast majority who drift through life reacting to circumstances. He put this concept near the end of his work deliberately, because he said most people aren't ready for it until they understand everything that comes before. In his later work, The Master Key to Riches, Hill described something he called cosmic habit force. It is the principle that the universe itself operates on habit, that any pattern repeated with enough emotional consistency eventually hardens into a fixed vibration. The same force that locks people into poverty through habitual fear can be deliberately reversed to lock them into wealth attraction through habitual faith. Here's what that means for you. You don't have to hold the new frequency through permanent willpower. You have to hold it long enough for it to lock in. There is a tipping point, a moment where your new emotional broadcast has been sustained so consistently that cosmic habit force takes over and maintains it for you. This is the difference between someone who tries to be positive and someone who simply is magnetic. One is performing, the other has locked in. Here's what happens to a tuning fork that is struck at the same frequency over and over, day after day. It begins to hold that pitch. The metal itself remembers. It vibrates more easily, more naturally, with less force each time. You don't have to strike the fork with the same intensity forever. You just have to strike it consistently enough that the frequency becomes self-sustaining. That is cosmic habit force doing its work. And once your aura has been retrained through sustained emotional repetition, you stop trying to broadcast certainty. You simply are certain. And everything around you that matches that frequency begins to move. Hill saw this in Carnegie more clearly than in anyone else he studied. By the time Hill met him, Carnegie's aura of magnetic authority was as natural as breathing. His mere presence in a room altered the decisions of everyone around him. People made commitments they wouldn't normally make. Opportunities materialized that logic couldn't explain. But Carnegie wasn't born with that signal. He was 13 years old, working in a cotton factory in Pennsylvania, earning $1.20 a week, and coming home with his hands raw. But even then, and Hill documented this, Carnegie held an image in his mind that did not match his circumstances. He didn't hope he'd be wealthy someday. He felt it. He carried the emotional certainty of a future he had no evidence for. And he held that feeling so consistently, for so long, that by the time Hill met him decades later, the signal had become the man. Carnegie didn't practice wealth consciousness. He was wealth consciousness. Cosmic habit force had done its work. And here's the part that takes this from self-improvement into something deeper. Hill wrote that through the medium of the ether, the brain has access to infinite intelligence, a force that can be drawn upon for the solution to any problem. What he was describing is the receiving side of the broadcast. When your tuning fork is struck cleanly, when your aura is broadcasting faith and definiteness of purpose, you don't just attract other people differently. You begin receiving ideas, hunches, flashes of insight that seem to come from nowhere. Hill called it the sixth sense. He said it was the door to the temple of wisdom. And it only opens when the broadcast is clean. Now I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds beautiful, but my situation is different. My debt is real. My failures are real. The people who overlook me aren't responding to my frequency. They just don't see value in what I offer. I understand that thought. I've had it. And Hill answered it directly through a man named R.U. Darby. Darby's uncle was the gold miner who quit 3 feet from gold, one of the most famous stories in success literature. But here's the part most people never hear. Darby himself took that lesson and transformed his entire life. He went into insurance, a field built entirely on one person's ability to transmit trust and certainty to another. and he became one of the most successful salesmen in the country. Darby later told Hill that every sale he made because of what he broadcast before he opened his mouth. He never let his signal waver again because he had lived the cost of a broken frequency. His uncle's signal shifted from faith to doubt, and a fortune was left in the ground. Darby swore that would never be his story. And here's what matters about Darby. His circumstances didn't change first. His aura changed first. The circumstances followed. Hill wrote that one of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. But I want you to hear what he's really saying. He's not just talking about quitting an action. He's talking about quitting a frequency. The moment you let temporary defeat shift your emotional broadcast from faith back to fear, you are quitting at the level that matters most. You are returning your tuning fork to its old frequency. And everything that had begun to resonate with the new signal goes silent again. And I know your fork has been vibrating at its current frequency for a long time, maybe years. Fear, self-doubt, the quiet hum of scarcity that runs so constantly, you've mistaken it for your own nature. But understand what a tuning fork actually is. It has no loyalty to the old pitch. The moment you strike it differently, with real force, with real emotion, it has to produce a new sound. Physics doesn't negotiate, and neither does your subconscious mind. The frequency you've been carrying is not your identity. It is simply the last strike that was strong enough to set you vibrating. So let me tell you what your life looks like when the fork has been restruck. 6 months from now, you walk into a room and something is different. Not your clothes, not your pitch, you. There is a steadiness behind your eyes that wasn't there before. A calm certainty that doesn't need anyone's approval to sustain itself. People feel it before you speak. Conversations open differently. Not because you've learned new techniques, but because your broadcast has changed and people are finally receiving you. Your relationship with money shifts from chasing to attracting, from anxiety to quiet expectation. And I'm not talking about vague abundance. I mean specific, tangible shifts. The client who reaches out to you instead of you chasing them. The raise that comes without you begging for it because your presence in the organization has changed. The business idea that lands fully formed at 2 a.m. because your subconscious, now broadcasting on a frequency aligned with wealth, has become a receiving station for ideas that match your signal. Hill documented this again and again. When Barnes's frequency locked in, Edison didn't just tolerate him. He made Barnes the exclusive distributor of the Edison dictating machine. Barnes became wealthy, genuinely, lastingly wealthy. Not by outworking anyone, but because his aura had made him the obvious choice. The opportunity didn't just arrive, the money followed, because it always does when the signal is right. Hill wrote that whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But hear that with new ears now. He wasn't talking about belief as a thought. He was talking about belief as a broadcast. An emotional signal so consistent and so charged with faith that cosmic habit force organizes reality around it. And I want to say something to you directly because I think you need to hear it from someone who means it. You are not missing something that other people have. You are not built wrong. The signal you've been carrying was installed by experiences you didn't choose, by moments of rejection and doubt that struck your fork before you knew you had one. But you are hearing this right now, which means something in you already resonates with a different frequency. You wouldn't have stayed this deep into this video if the old signal was all you had. Something in you is already tuning. So here is what I'm asking you to do, not tomorrow, tonight. I'm giving you a practice rooted directly in Hill's principles, and I'm asking you to treat it as a test of your desire, because Hill said desire is the starting point of all achievement. Not a hope, not a wish. A keen, pulsating desire that transcends everything. And if you truly desire to change what you attract, this practice will prove it. Step 1. Before you enter any meaningful interaction, a meeting, a call, a conversation where something is at stake, you pause and ask yourself one question. What am I broadcasting right now? Not what am I about to say? What am I feeling? If the answer is need, doubt, or fear, you do not proceed until you've reset. You become aware of the signal before you send it. Step 2. Every morning, you spend time not stating your purpose, but feeling into it. You generate the emotional state of already having achieved what you want, not as a picture in your mind, but as a sensation in your body. You hold that feeling until your breathing shifts, until your posture changes, until something in your chest opens. And that is the moment your subconscious accepts the instruction. That is the moment your broadcast changes. Step 3. You do this for 30 consecutive days. Not when you feel like it. Every single day. Because Hill identified that consistency is what triggers cosmic habit force. Your goal is not to feel good occasionally. Your goal is to broadcast so consistently that the new frequency locks in and your aura maintains itself without effort. This is not about thinking positively. This is about training your broadcast with the same discipline you'd bring to anything else that mattered. Hill said the starting point is desire. This practice is the test of yours. On those two men from the beginning of this video, the one who was invisible and the one who was magnetic, the only difference between them was what they had trained their subconscious to broadcast. One day, let his aura be shaped by circumstance, by fear, by the accumulated weight of every past failure. The other deliberately retrained his signal, day by day, emotion by emotion, until his aura became a permanent frequency for wealth. You now know which one you've been, and you know how to become the other. You came to this video as a tuning fork that had been struck by circumstance, by every rejection, every room where you were overlooked, every moment someone looked through you as if you weren't there. And that frequency has been running. I know it has. You can feel it when you walk into a space where you want to be seen. You can feel it in the distance between who you are and how the world responds to you. But now you know something you didn't know at the start of this conversation. You know that the fork can be restruck. You know that emotion is the force and repetition is the lock. You know that the same mechanism that has been broadcasting scarcity on your behalf can be retrained deliberately, daily, until cosmic habit force takes over and holds the new pitch for you. The wealth, the opportunities, the people, they haven't been ignoring you. They've been waiting for a frequency they could finally resonate with. Give them that frequency. Strike the fork tonight, and don't stop striking it until the whole room begins to hum. I believe you found this video for a reason. Not because an algorithm served it to you, but because something in you recognized this title as an answer to a question you've been carrying. Your aura is not fixed. It never was. What you broadcast tomorrow does not have to be what you broadcast today. Hill proved it, Barnes proved it, Darby proved it, Carnegie proved it, and I have lived it. Hill wrote these words near the end of his life, and I want you to carry them with you when this video ends. You are the master of your destiny. You can influence, direct, and control your own environment. You can make your life what you want it to be. Train your aura. Change your signal, and watch what begins to move toward you.